It was a typical afternoon at Lux Living, one of the high-end stores that lined the city's prestigious shopping district. The floors gleamed under the bright lights, and the air smelled of expensive perfumes and polished wood. Shiny bags hung on the racks, each one a symbol of success, and the salespeople moved with a kind of quiet urgency. They knew what their customers expected and prided themselves on delivering that high-end experience. But as the door chimed and a man stepped inside, no one seemed to notice him at first. He was dressed in a simple gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn sneakers, far from the usual polished suits and designer clothes that walked through the door every day. He had a calm demeanor, almost too calm, as if he had already seen everything this world had to offer. But what no one in the store knew was that the man wasn't just another customer. He wasn't just someone there to shop or browse. He was about to change everything for them, though they didn't know it yet. As he walked through the aisles, his eyes scanning the shelves, a few of the employees looked his way, exchanging quick glances. It wasn't that he stood out in the crowd, but there was something about him, something unassuming, that made people look twice. The manager, Jeff, stood behind the counter, watching with a slight smirk. Jeff had been working in retail for years and knew exactly how to spot a customer. His usual clientele were businessmen and celebrities, people who wore suits that cost more than most people's rent. But this man in the hoodie, was different. Jeff looked at him, immediately making a judgment based on his appearance. He assumed this man didn't belong here. Walking toward the entrance of the store, the man paused for a moment. His eyes met the store manager's, and for a split second, Jeff felt something stir in him, a brief moment of hesitation, but he quickly dismissed it. "Can I help you, sir?" Jeff asked, his voice as polite as a seasoned manager's, but with an edge of superiority in it. The man gave him a small smile, a slight nod. "I'm just looking around," he said casually, his voice smooth and calm. There was something about his words that made Jeff raise an eyebrow, but he didn't dwell on it. People like him weren't worth wasting time on. Jeff had seen his type before, someone trying to look important but didn't have a dime to his name. So he continued to monitor him from the corner of his eye, confident the man would either leave soon or simply settle for whatever cheap thing he could afford. Minutes passed, and Jeff continued with his work, checking his phone, arranging displays. He glanced up once or twice, noting the man was still there, lingering by the expensive watches. But he wasn't moving fast enough to be a real customer, or so Jeff thought. It was just a game for him, walking around the store, pretending to browse. No serious buyer would dress like that. Jeans and sneakers in a place meant for million-dollar purchases. Jeff had seen it all before. The man wasn't someone Jeff needed to bother. Finally, after a few more moments, Jeff felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see the man standing right beside him, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Excuse me," the man said softly, his voice now a bit more serious. "I was wondering if you could help me with something." Jeff looked the man up and down, still not impressed, his eyes narrowing slightly. He assumed this would be another awkward exchange, maybe an attempt to get a discount or ask for something impossible. Jeff prepared his usual response, ready to brush him off with an indifferent smile. But what came next wasn't what he expected. The man simply said, "I'm actually looking for a position here. Do you have any job openings?" His words hung in the air, and for a moment Jeff didn't react. He blinked, confused by the question. His eyes moved back and forth between the man's unassuming attire and the well-dressed people who were browsing the store. This was the kind of place where only the most professional, the most refined people walked through the doors. No one like this man. And yet here he was, asking for a job. Jeff couldn't help but let out a small, almost mocking laugh. He crossed his arms, sizing up the man, wondering if he was serious. "A job?" Jeff repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "You're asking about a job here?" He couldn't help but feel a bit of amusement at the request. This man, dressed in a hoodie and sneakers, was standing in front of him, in a store where the least expensive item cost more than most people's monthly rent. His mind immediately shifted to the ridiculousness of it all. This had to be a joke, right? The man was clearly not someone he would want on the team, probably not even qualified for anything but a very low-level position. Jeff didn't even think about the implications of his own prejudice. "Yeah," the man said, his expression unchanged. "I'll take anything, just looking for an opportunity." There was a calmness in his voice that Jeff couldn't quite place. It wasn't desperation, it wasn't pleading, it was just resolute. But Jeff wasn't interested in seeing the man for who he really was. Instead, he saw an easy opportunity to dismiss him. "Sure," Jeff said with a dismissive shrug. "We're actually hiring for a stockroom assistant. It's not glamorous work, but it's something." "The back's over there," Jeff pointed, his eyes already darting back to the more important customers coming through the door. He assumed the man would leave soon, just like the others who had no business being there in the first place. But the man didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer. "I'll take it," he said, his voice steady. The words felt like a challenge, though Jeff didn't understand it at the time. A chuckle escaped Jeff's lips as he shook his head, amused at what he thought was a joke. "All right, well, if you really want to work in the back, I guess that's where you'll be." He dismissed the man with a flick of his hand, already moving on to other things, unaware of what was unfolding. The man just stood there nodding, a small smile creeping onto his lips as he turned to leave, completely unfazed by the treatment he had just endured. In that moment, no one in the store had any idea that everything was about to change. They didn't know it, but this man, the one they thought didn't belong, was about to turn their world upside down. The next few hours passed like any regular day in Lux Living. The store's polished floors were a reflection of the clean, orderly world they believed they operated in. Customers came in and out, browsing, buying, and being treated like royalty. Jeff moved around the store, his mind already onto the next task. He kept an eye on the man in the hoodie, who had disappeared into the back as instructed. Jeff figured he'd be gone soon, not bothering anyone, just killing time until he could leave and get on with his day. It was almost laughable to think that anyone like him would be serious about working at a place like Lux Living. But as the afternoon wore on, something strange happened. The man didn't leave. He didn't wander around aimlessly either. Instead, he started doing exactly what Jeff had told him to do, work in the back, and not just any work. The man cleaned. He worked fast, efficiently, and quietly. Jeff couldn't help but notice him now, moving like someone who knew exactly what they were doing, with a kind of controlled focus that most employees didn't have. He watched from a distance as the man scrubbed down surfaces and straightened things up in the stockroom. There was no slacking, no hesitation, just work. The man wasn't acting like someone who had no business being in such a high-end store. He acted like he belonged. As time went by, Jeff started to feel a little uncomfortable, but he quickly brushed the thought away. What did it matter anyway? He had already dismissed the guy, and there was nothing more to it. The man didn't fit the image of Lux Living's usual staff, and that was that. The rest of the afternoon went by with little drama. Customers were happy, the sales were steady, and Jeff kept doing his job, managing the store with the same indifference he always had. But something nagged at the back of his mind. Something about the man in the hoodie just felt off. Then, towards the end of the day, Jeff was caught off guard. The man walked past him again, his face calm as always, carrying a small box of stock to the front counter. Jeff looked at him for a moment, his eyes lingering a little longer than usual. But just as quickly, he turned his attention to a new customer entering the store. He didn't want to think too much about it. After all, he had work to do. Little did he know the man had been watching everything. While Jeff had been busy passing judgment, the man had been quietly observing. He had seen the way Jeff treated him, the assumptions Jeff made based on his appearance. He saw the way the store staff moved around, some of them treating him like he didn't belong, while others barely acknowledged his presence. He had learned everything he needed to learn. This wasn't just any ordinary visit, it was the beginning of something much bigger. And as the store began to empty out and the evening lights grew dim, the man in the hoodie looked at Jeff, who was still behind the counter, tapping away at his phone. He didn't say a word, just walked past him again, heading toward the back exit. But this time, something felt different. This time, it was all about timing. The door opened with a soft chime, and Jeff barely glanced up. It was closing time, and there was still plenty of work to be done. But then, just as the door clicked shut, a voice from behind startled him. "Hey, Jeff," the man said, his tone different this time, more authoritative. Jeff spun around, surprised to hear his name. "You know," the man continued, his voice smooth, calm, and yet filled with something Jeff couldn't quite place. "I've seen a lot today, and there's something I think you should know." Jeff felt a slight unease creep up his spine as he looked at the man standing before him, still in the hoodie, though there was something in his presence that Jeff couldn't ignore, something that had shifted. But before Jeff could respond, the man added, "I'm actually the owner of this store." Jeff's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The words didn't make sense. How could this be? This man, the one who had been working in the back, the one he had dismissed so easily, was the owner? He blinked, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Was this some kind of joke? But the man's gaze was steady, unshaken, as if the words weren't even a big deal. For a moment, Jeff didn't know how to react. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening, and then it hit him. All at once, everything came together. The quiet confidence, the way the man moved, the way he spoke. But it was too late. It was too late to apologize or make things right. The truth had just been laid out, and there was nothing Jeff could do to change it now. He stared at the man, at a loss for words, as the realization set in. The man wasn't just another customer. He was the one who owned it all, the one who had been watching, observing, and now it was his turn to make the decisions. The silence in the store was thick, heavy with the weight of Jeff's realization. His mouth opened and closed, but no words seemed to escape. He stood there, frozen, staring at the man in the hoodie, as if trying to make sense of the situation. The man, however, remained composed, his expression calm and almost knowing. It was like he had anticipated this moment all along. Jeff blinked, his thoughts racing in every direction. The irony of it all hit him. He had dismissed this man, treated him like he was nothing more than a nuisance, a person who didn't belong in the world of high-end retail. But here he was, the very person who had the power to control everything that Jeff had worked for. A sinking feeling began to settle in the pit of Jeff's stomach. He could almost hear the echoes of his previous judgments, his harsh words, and the way he had looked down on the man. For a long moment, the two men just stood there, locked in an unspoken battle of wills. Jeff could feel the sting of embarrassment creeping up his neck. How could he have been so blind? How could he have assumed that this man didn't belong here, that he was just another nobody looking for a handout? The irony wasn't lost on Jeff. It wasn't the man who had been out of place. It was him. Finally, the man broke the silence, his voice soft but firm. "I've been watching everything. The way you treated me, the way you treated others. I see how things are around here. I think it's time for some changes." The words hit Jeff like a slap across the face. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. The truth was, he had been so caught up in his own prejudices that he hadn't even considered what was really happening. Jeff felt a surge of panic. What had he done? The weight of his actions began to feel like a heavy burden pressing down on him. He had underestimated this man, misjudged him in every way possible. Now it seemed like there was no way out. His mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next. Would he be fired? Would he be forced to apologize for his behavior? The man, who had been so quiet up until now, stepped forward with a calm and measured pace. His voice dropped, but the authority in it only grew stronger. "You know, I've spent a lot of time working in this store, seeing how people treat others, how people who think they're better than everyone else can push others down without thinking twice. But that ends now. Starting today, things are going to change." Jeff swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. His mind raced as he thought about how this would affect him, his career, and his future at Lux Living. What would this man do now that the truth was out? Would he fire Jeff on the spot? Would he expose him for how he had treated him and others? The fear was almost suffocating. But before Jeff could speak, the man continued, his words cutting through the tension in the room. "You see, Jeff, the thing about power is, it's not about what you have or who you think you are. It's about how you treat people. And you've made it very clear how you see others. It's about time you learned what real power is, what it means to be respected for who you are, not what you own or wear." Every word the man spoke felt like a direct hit to Jeff's pride. He was no longer the one in control, no longer the one who could make others feel small. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of his arrogance pressing down on him. What had started as a simple misunderstanding was now spiraling into something much larger, something he couldn't take back. The man stepped back, his gaze never leaving Jeff. "But don't worry, Jeff. I'm not here to make you feel small. I'm just here to show you what it means to lead with respect." And with that, the man turned, heading toward the back of the store again. Jeff stood there, dumbfounded. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing off his wealth or status. It was about respect, something Jeff had taken for granted, something he had never truly understood. And now, he was about to learn that lesson the hard way. As the man disappeared into the back of the store, Jeff felt a mix of fear, guilt, and disbelief. How had he gotten here? How had he let his own biases dictate his actions for so long? The man had come in as a stranger, and now he was walking out as someone who would forever change everything about how Jeff saw the world. The tension lingered in the air as Jeff stood alone, trying to process what had just unfolded. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was never going to be the same again. And it was all because he had disrespected the wrong person. The following day, Jeff arrived at Lux Living with a heavy heart. He couldn't shake the events of the previous evening from his mind. The look in the man's eyes, the calm authority in his voice. It had all felt surreal, like something out of a dream. How could he have been so blind? How could he have treated someone like that, assuming he didn't belong? Every moment replayed in Jeff's mind, the mistakes stacking up in an ever-growing pile of regret. As he walked into the store, the usual hum of activity surrounded him, but it all felt different now. His colleagues moved about their tasks, chatting and laughing, but Jeff couldn't focus. He felt like an outsider in his own workplace, as if everyone could sense his guilt. Every exchange felt awkward, every conversation strained. The shadow of the man in the hoodie loomed over him, a constant reminder of the judgment Jeff had passed just hours before. Around noon, the door chimed again. Jeff looked up, expecting another routine customer, but when his eyes fell on the man, his stomach dropped. There he was, the same man from yesterday, walking through the door once more. But this time, something was different. The man wasn't alone. With him was a group of people, well-dressed, clearly influential. They were professionals, businessmen, lawyers, the kind of people who held power in the city. They moved with an air of importance, and it was clear that they weren't here to shop for handbags or clothes. They were here for something else, something much bigger. Jeff's heart pounded in his chest. He quickly looked away, trying not to make it obvious that he had seen the man. The last thing he wanted was for anyone to notice his discomfort. But it was too late. The man's eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, Jeff realized that the man had been watching him all along. It was like he could feel the weight of his gaze, the silent judgment. Jeff froze, suddenly feeling exposed, like his every mistake was being broadcasted for everyone to see. The man approached the counter slowly, his presence almost overwhelming. The room seemed to fall silent as he reached Jeff, and for a moment the world outside Lux Living disappeared. It was just the two of them standing there. The man didn't say anything at first. Instead, he simply looked at Jeff, his expression unreadable. Jeff felt a wave of panic wash over him, his hands sweating as he fumbled with the items in front of him. "Jeff," the man said, his voice cool but firm. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Jeff's mouth went dry. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. He didn't know what to say. The words from yesterday, his dismissiveness, his rudeness, they all came flooding back. The man had been right all along, and now there was no escaping it. Jeff had no excuses left. "I hope you're having a good day," the man continued, his tone neutral. Jeff's eyes flicked nervously between him and the group of people who had followed him inside. They all stood quietly, observing. Jeff's heart raced. What did they want? Why were they here? Was this a test? Were they about to reveal something even more embarrassing? Before Jeff could open his mouth, the man spoke again, his voice lowering just enough for Jeff to hear clearly. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I think it's time to address the way things are run here." The words hit Jeff like a punch to the stomach. He knew exactly what the man meant. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the entire store, the way people were treated, the assumptions they made about others based on appearances. The man's eyes never left Jeff's face as he continued, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable authority. "This store, this business, it needs to be a place of respect for everyone, not just for those who look a certain way or who can afford to buy a certain brand. We need to make sure that no one is ever made to feel less than because of who they are." Jeff nodded, his throat tight. He felt ashamed, but he knew the man was right. The way he had treated him, the way the staff treated others, it all needed to change. But he couldn't help the panic that bubbled up inside of him. What if it was too late for him? What if the man was about to expose him, to fire him on the spot for his behavior? The man seemed to read his thoughts, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Don't worry, Jeff," he said with a slight smirk. "This isn't about revenge. It's about doing what's right. And you'll be part of that change." The words seemed to hang in the air between them. It wasn't a threat, but a promise, a challenge. With that, the man turned and walked away, leaving Jeff standing there, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. The group followed him silently, but Jeff could feel their eyes on him as they passed. He could feel their judgment, their silent acknowledgement that something was wrong with how things had been run in this store, and he knew, deep down, that the man was right. Things were going to change, and Jeff had to be a part of it. As the door closed behind them, Jeff felt a shift in the atmosphere, a sense of responsibility weighing on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. The man had shown him a truth he couldn't ignore anymore. Respect wasn't something you could just give to people you thought deserved it. It was something that needed to be given to everyone, regardless of their appearance, their background, or their status. And now, it was time for Jeff to learn what that really meant. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Jeff. He tried to focus on his tasks, but his mind kept drifting back to the conversation he had had with the man, no, the owner, earlier. His words echoed in Jeff's mind, louder than the usual chatter of customers and employees. There was no escaping it. He had thought he was the one in control of the store, the one who could decide who was important and who wasn't. But now, everything had changed. The store wasn't just a place for luxury goods, it was a reflection of something much bigger, a microcosm of the power dynamics that had always been in place. And as much as Jeff tried to go back to business as usual, he couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that had settled in his chest. The man, the owner, had made it clear that things needed to change, and Jeff had no idea what that meant for him. He could feel the eyes of the other employees on him, their curiosity mixed with judgment. Had they heard what the man said? Did they know the truth? Did they think Jeff was responsible for the way things had been? He couldn't be sure, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get uncomfortable. Around closing time, as Jeff was preparing to leave, he heard the soft chime of the door again. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. The man, the owner, was back. This time, he wasn't alone. With him was a woman, a sharp-dressed woman with an air of authority about her. She didn't smile as she entered, and she walked with purpose, as though she knew exactly where she was going. Jeff's heart skipped a beat. What now? Was the man going to make his move? They made their way through the store, their eyes scanning the shelves and displays. Jeff stood frozen behind the counter, trying to look busy, trying not to show his nervousness. He knew that whatever happened next, it was going to affect his life. He had already messed up once, and now he couldn't help but wonder if he was about to pay the price for his earlier mistakes. The woman with the man stopped by the counter, her gaze shifting over to Jeff. She was calm, composed, and yet there was something about her presence that made Jeff feel small. She was sharp, someone who saw through the surface and understood the true dynamics at play. She looked at Jeff for a long moment, her eyes scanning him like she was reading his every thought. "Jeff, right?" she asked, her voice cool and professional. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, that's me." "Good," she said without a smile. "I've been hearing some things about this store, about how things are run, about how people are treated. It doesn't sound good." Jeff felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't help but shift uncomfortably. I don't know what you mean." The woman didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of surprise. "I think you do, and I think we both know exactly what needs to happen." She paused, her gaze never leaving his. "This place needs a change, and I'm here to help make that happen." Jeff opened his mouth, but no words came out. He couldn't argue with her. What could he say? The truth was staring him in the face. He had been part of a system that treated people unfairly, a system that had been built on judgment and prejudice. And now the man who he had dismissed so easily, the one he had looked down on, was bringing that system crashing down. The woman's gaze softened just a fraction, as though she could see the panic in Jeff's eyes. "You're not the only one who's going to be held accountable, Jeff," she said. "But you have a choice now. You can either be part of the change or you can be part of the problem. It's up to you." Jeff's mind raced. He had never thought of it that way before. He had always been part of the system, going along with it because it was easy, because it was the way things had always been. But now, standing in front of him was a choice, a chance to make things right, to change the way he saw the world and the way he treated others. But would he be able to do it? Could he? Before Jeff could respond, the man spoke, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Jeff, we're going to make some changes around here, starting with how we treat people. You'll see. I've been watching this place for a while now, and I'm not going to let it continue this way." The woman nodded in agreement. "It's time for a fresh start," she said, her tone final. As they turned to leave, the weight of their words hung heavily in the air. Jeff felt like he was standing on the edge of something big, something that would change everything. He didn't know where this would lead, but one thing was clear. His days of judging people based on appearances, of treating others like they didn't belong, were over. It was time for him to step up and do better. But the question lingered in his mind. Would he be able to follow through? Would he be able to look at people differently, to see beyond their clothes, their status, their race? Only time would tell. But Jeff knew that things would never be the same again, not for him, and not for anyone else at Lux Living. The real challenge was just beginning. The next few days felt like an eternity for Jeff. Each morning he walked into Lux Living with a new sense of unease, like a shadow looming over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone knew what had happened. His guilt gnawed at him with every interaction, every glance from his colleagues. The man in the hoodie had been right. He had been part of something wrong, a system built on unspoken rules that treated some people as less than others simply because of their appearance. But now that the truth had been revealed, everything seemed different. And as much as Jeff wanted to go back to business as usual, he knew that wasn't an option anymore. The changes were already starting to take shape. The woman who had accompanied the man had returned to the store several times, overseeing what Jeff could only describe as a complete overhaul. She was meticulous, paying attention to every detail, how customers were greeted, how employees interacted with each other, and how things were being done behind the scenes. It was clear that she was in charge now. She had a quiet confidence, and everyone respected her, even though no one knew exactly who she was or what her connection to the owner was. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that things were changing, and they were changing fast. One morning, as Jeff was preparing for another day of uncertainty, he noticed the store manager approaching him. His name was Greg, a tall, imposing figure who had worked at Lux Living for years. Greg had always been the type of manager who carried himself with authority, often looking down on others, and Jeff had always felt a sense of camaraderie with him. But today, Greg's expression was different. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something more neutral, maybe even cautious. Jeff felt his heart race as Greg stepped closer. "Jeff," Greg said, his tone surprisingly soft, "I wanted to talk to you for a minute." Jeff swallowed, unsure of what to expect. He had already heard whispers around the store about the changes that were coming, but he hadn't heard anything directly from the higher-ups. Was he about to be pulled aside for a reprimand? Was he going to lose his job for his earlier mistakes? He had no idea. "I know things have been a little tense around here," Greg continued, his eyes scanning the room briefly before returning to Jeff. "But I need you to understand something. There are going to be some changes, and I'm going to need your help with that. This isn't just about the way we treat customers, it's about the way we treat each other. We've all been part of something that was wrong, but now we have the opportunity to make it right." Jeff felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't an accusation. Greg was on his side. The realization hit him like a wave. He had been waiting for someone to point the finger at him, to hold him accountable for the way he had treated the man and others. But here, Greg was, asking for his help. It wasn't just about Jeff's mistakes anymore. It was about a collective responsibility to fix what had been broken. "You're not alone in this," Greg said, as if reading Jeff's thoughts. "We've all got a role to play in making things better, and I'm counting on you to help lead the way." Jeff nodded, a weight lifting off his shoulders. For the first time in days, he felt like he had a purpose. The changes that the man in the hoodie had spoken of were starting to take shape, and Jeff had a part to play in that. He wasn't just going to sit by and watch. It was time for him to step up, to prove that he could change, to prove that he could be better. As the day went on, Jeff couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere in the store had shifted. It was subtle at first, small gestures of kindness between employees, more genuine interactions with customers. But as the hours passed, the changes became more noticeable. The old hierarchy, the unspoken rules that had governed how people were treated based on their clothes, their race, or their position in the company, were starting to dissolve. It was slow, but it was happening. Jeff found himself thinking back to the moment when the man had first revealed who he was. The shock, the disbelief, the way everything had fallen into place. He had underestimated him. He had dismissed him because of his appearance, his clothing, the way he carried himself. But now, standing in the midst of this slow transformation, Jeff realized just how wrong he had been. The man in the hoodie had taught him something that he would never forget. He had shown him that respect wasn't something that could be earned based on superficial things. It had to be given freely to everyone, no matter their background, their clothes, or their status. And now, as Jeff looked around the store, he saw the beginnings of a new culture, one where respect was at the core of everything they did. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew that it was a step in the right direction. A small step, maybe, but it was a start. Jeff wasn't perfect, and he knew he had a long way to go before he could fully embrace the changes that were unfolding around him. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. There was a chance for redemption, a chance to prove that he could be part of the solution, not the problem. And that thought, however small, gave him the strength to face the rest of the day with a renewed sense of purpose. As the days passed, the changes at Lux Living began to show more clearly. The customers noticed it first. The store was still as polished as ever, but the energy in the air felt different. Employees were more attentive, more present in their interactions with customers. It wasn't just about pushing the most expensive items anymore. It was about genuinely connecting with people no matter who they were or what they wore. Jeff had begun to see the shift in his own behavior. He started paying closer attention to the way he spoke to people, the way he treated everyone who came through the door, not just the high-profile customers he had always catered to. He began to realize that the smallest gestures of respect, greeting everyone with a smile, listening to what they had to say, made a huge difference. It wasn't about fawning over the rich and famous, but about acknowledging each person's worth. One morning, as Jeff was organizing the front displays, a woman walked into the store, wearing simple clothes and carrying a small, worn-out bag. She didn't look like she had money to spend on anything in the store, but Jeff greeted her with the same warmth he had been offering to everyone lately. As he showed her around, helping her find exactly what she needed, he saw a smile break across her face. "Thank you for being so kind," she said, her voice soft. "I haven't had anyone treat me this way in a long time." It was a moment that stayed with Jeff throughout the rest of the day. He realized that it wasn't just about making a sale. It was about making people feel seen, making them feel valued. And this woman, in her humble clothes, had left a lasting impression on him. He couldn't remember the last time he had made someone feel like that, and it made him wonder how many others had come through the store and left without ever feeling respected. But as much as Jeff had changed, the journey was far from over. The staff was still adjusting, and there was still much work to do. Greg, the store manager, had been working closely with the woman from the owner's team, organizing staff meetings and giving everyone a chance to discuss their thoughts on the new direction. These meetings were a way to bring the whole team together and ensure everyone was on the same page. But it was clear that there were still some employees who weren't fully on board with the changes. Some resisted, either because they didn't want to let go of old habits or because they didn't fully understand why things needed to change. One afternoon, as Jeff walked through the store, he overheard a conversation between two employees in the break room. They were talking in hushed tones, clearly unaware that Jeff was just around the corner. "What's all this about treating everyone equally?" one of them said. "I don't get it. We've been doing just fine with the way things were." Jeff's stomach twisted. He had heard this kind of talk before, but it felt different now. Before, he might have dismissed it, going along with the status quo, but now he felt responsible for the shift in the store's culture. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was part of the change, and he couldn't ignore what he had just heard. After a deep breath, Jeff walked into the break room, ready to face the situation head-on. "Hey, guys," he said, his voice calm but firm. They turned around, surprised to see him. He could see the guilt flash across their faces as they realized they had been overheard. "I heard what you were saying," Jeff continued, keeping his tone even. "And I get it. Change isn't easy. But this isn't just about sales. It's about respect. If we want to make Lux Living a place where everyone feels welcome, we have to start treating people differently. It's not about what they wear or how much money they have. It's about acknowledging their worth as human beings." There was a long pause as the employees absorbed Jeff's words. One of them, a woman who had been working at the store for years, spoke up. "But it's hard, Jeff. We've always been told to treat the rich and famous like they're the most important. It's all we've known." Jeff nodded, understanding where she was coming from. "I know, but we've been doing it all wrong. The truth is, treating everyone with respect doesn't take anything away from us. It makes us better at what we do. We're not just here to sell products, we're here to build relationships. And that starts with how we treat each person who walks through that door." The room was silent for a moment, and Jeff could see that his words had struck a chord. He wasn't sure if they would all embrace the change right away, but it was a start, a small but important step in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, things began to feel more natural. The changes that had started so gradually were now taking root in the daily routines of Lux Living. The staff was more cohesive, more aware of the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their background. Jeff noticed that the tension that had once existed between the employees had started to fade, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. They were all in this together now, working toward the same goal of making Lux Living a place of inclusivity and respect. The man in the hoodie, the owner, hadn't been back to the store since his last visit, but his presence was still felt in every corner of the store. His quiet influence had set everything in motion, and now it was up to Jeff and his colleagues to carry it forward. The woman who had worked alongside him had continued her oversight, making sure the store remained on track. Jeff had even noticed that she'd been speaking with some of the higher-ups in the company, suggesting new training programs for employees and more community outreach. She was pushing the store to become a model for change in the retail industry, and Jeff couldn't help but feel a sense of pride to be a part of it. It wasn't easy. There were still challenges. Some customers didn't understand the new approach, and a few were quick to voice their displeasure. They missed the old Lux Living, the one where wealth and status were the driving force behind everything. But Jeff learned to let those comments roll off his back. He knew what they didn't, that the changes they were making were far more important than any sale or any customer complaint. They were building something that would last, something that would make Lux Living a company people could be proud of. One afternoon, as Jeff was wrapping up a conversation with a particularly difficult customer, he saw the man in the hoodie again. This time, there was no surprise, no panic. The man wasn't alone either. He was with his father, the billionaire who owned the company, and they were both watching quietly from across the store. The air seemed to hold its breath as Jeff realized that this moment was different. This time, the owner wasn't just observing the store, he was watching to see if the changes had truly taken root. Jeff took a deep breath, straightened his back, and walked over to greet them. This wasn't about impressing them with his knowledge of the store's inventory or trying to sell them anything. It was about showing them that the changes were real, that the lessons they had learned, the respect they had begun to cultivate, were not just lip service. It was about demonstrating that Lux Living had become the kind of place where every person mattered, no matter who they were. As he walked up to them, the man in the hoodie gave him a small nod of approval. Jeff smiled, feeling the weight of the journey they had all been through. This was just the beginning, but it felt like a victory nonetheless. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind of new possibilities. Lux Living had become more than just a store. It had become a symbol of change, a beacon for what could be when people put aside their differences and worked together for a greater purpose. The man in the hoodie had transformed not just the store, but the lives of everyone who worked there. And in turn, Jeff had transformed as well. He had learned that respect wasn't just about showing politeness, it was about understanding the inherent worth of every individual. It was about seeing people for who they were, not for what they could do for you. Jeff had spent years working in a system that prioritized status and wealth above all else, but now he knew better. He knew that the true measure of success wasn't in the brand you wore or the money in your bank account. It was in how you treated others, how you made them feel when they were in your presence. As Jeff looked around the store, he saw a different energy, a stronger, more unified team. They were no longer just employees doing a job, they were a community, bound together by a shared commitment to respect and kindness. And Jeff knew that it wasn't just Lux Living that was changing. It was the world around them, one small step at a time. But as much as Jeff had changed, he knew that this journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still people who needed to understand the value of respect, of seeing others for who they truly were. But Jeff wasn't afraid of the future anymore. He was ready, because he knew that, together, they could make a difference. A month had passed since Jeff first found himself face to face with the man in the hoodie, the one who turned out to be the owner of Lux Living. Since then, the transformation at the store had been remarkable. It was as if a new energy had taken root, one that was all about respect and fairness. Jeff had spent hours reflecting on his own behavior, realizing how much he had taken for granted. He had once thought that the key to success was power, status, and wealth. But now he knew better. The real success came from how you treated people, the relationships you built, the respect you earned, and the kindness you showed. The changes weren't just visible inside the store. They had begun to ripple outward, into the community. Lux Living started holding charity events, hosting local artists, and offering job training programs for people who had been overlooked by society. These weren't just acts of goodwill. They were a reflection of the company's newfound values. The store wasn't just about luxury anymore. It was about lifting others up, giving back to those who had been overlooked, and creating a space where everyone felt like they belonged. Jeff had always thought that luxury was about exclusivity, about keeping certain people in and others out. But now, he saw that true luxury came from inclusivity. It was about creating a space where everyone, no matter their background or appearance, could walk through the door and feel like they were treated with dignity. Lux Living had become a brand not just about high-end goods, but about high-end values. One afternoon, Jeff was working the counter when a man walked in wearing a simple jacket and jeans. His clothes weren't flashy, but there was something about him that made Jeff pause. The man's eyes scanned the store, taking in the clean, organized displays and the more relaxed, welcoming vibe of the place. Jeff noticed that the man wasn't here to browse. There was purpose in his stride. "Can I help you?" Jeff asked, trying to hide his curiosity. The man smiled and nodded. "Actually, I'm here to meet with the owner." Jeff's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly who this man was. He had seen him in the press, at charity events, and in the boardrooms of some of the city's biggest companies. This was one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs, someone whose wealth and influence could change things in an instant. The man in front of him wasn't just anyone. He was a billionaire. Jeff couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Lux Living had become the kind of place where even the most influential people could walk in and feel comfortable, welcomed, and valued. And this man, someone who, just a few months ago, would have been treated differently by Jeff, was now here to meet with the owner. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. The message that had been instilled in Jeff was spreading, and it was reaching even the most powerful people in the city. Before Jeff could ask anything further, the man nodded toward the back of the store. "I've been hearing a lot of great things about what you're doing here," he said with a smile. "I'd love to talk with your owner about a potential collaboration." Jeff smiled back, his chest swelling with pride. "I think you'll be very impressed," he said, watching the man walk toward the back offices where the owner would greet him. It wasn't just about the clothes or the goods anymore. It was about the connections they were building and the positive impact they were having on the world around them. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Lux Living's shift in culture and values was gaining attention in more ways than one. The collaboration that had begun with the billionaire entrepreneur brought a new wave of interest to the store. Lux Living wasn't just about high-end products, it had become a hub for community outreach, creativity, and social responsibility. The collaboration with the billionaire entrepreneur led to the launch of a new initiative that supported underprivileged youth, offering them mentorship and job training in the retail industry. The store was buzzing with excitement. It wasn't about simply making sales anymore. It was about making an impact. And this change was something Jeff felt in his bones. The culture had shifted so drastically that it was hard to imagine things ever being the same. But while everything felt positive, there was still a nagging feeling inside him. He had seen firsthand how difficult it could be for people to let go of old habits, and he knew that not everyone was fully on board with the new direction. There were still some employees who struggled to embrace the change, people who weren't ready to give up the old mindset. One afternoon, while preparing for another charity event, Jeff overheard two of the older staff members talking in hushed tones in the break room. "I don't know about all this respect for everyone nonsense," one of them was saying. "It's all well and good, but what happened to keeping the customers happy, no matter what?" The other employee, a man who had been working at Lux Living for years, sighed. "I get what you mean, but I'm starting to see it differently. We're changing things around here, and it's working. People are responding to it, and it feels right." Jeff couldn't help but overhear. He stood frozen, unsure of what to say. This was exactly what he had feared. Not everyone had embraced the new values yet. The idea of treating every customer with equal respect, no matter their background, was still a hard sell for some. But Jeff knew that the more they worked at it, the more they would see the fruits of their labor. Change never came overnight. But Jeff had learned an important lesson during this process. He had seen what true respect and fairness looked like in action. He knew that if Lux Living was going to be successful in this new era, it needed to be a collective effort. Everyone had to be on board. It wasn't enough to simply have a few people on board. If the store was going to live up to its values, every employee needed to believe in it, from the top down to the bottom. So Jeff made a decision. He would take the initiative and help guide his colleagues through this process. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but he was committed to seeing it through. He knew that, in the end, Lux Living would be stronger for it. The next morning, Jeff gathered the staff for a meeting. He started by acknowledging that change wasn't easy, but that it was necessary. "We've come a long way, but we still have work to do," Jeff said, his voice steady. "It's about more than just customer service. It's about building a culture of respect. It's about treating everyone with dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. And we all have a role in making that happen." The room was silent at first, but then, slowly, Jeff could see the shift. He could feel it in the way his colleagues were nodding, in the way they were starting to open up. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And Jeff knew that as long as they continued to move forward, they would get there together. The following months were a testament to the power of change. Lux Living wasn't just a store anymore. It had become a symbol for what could happen when people came together with a shared vision of respect, equality, and compassion. The efforts to reach out to underprivileged communities had grown exponentially, with more mentorship programs, charity events, and collaborations than anyone could have imagined. Jeff had become one of the key figures in the store's transformation. He wasn't just a sales associate anymore. He had grown into a leader, someone who understood the importance of creating a culture where every person felt valued. He had become a role model for his colleagues, showing them that respect wasn't just something they gave to a select few. It was something that should be extended to everyone all the time. But the most rewarding part for Jeff was seeing the shift in his own heart. He had once been so focused on status and wealth, believing that power came from the clothes people wore or the money they had. But now he understood that true power came from how you treated others, from the impact you made on the world around you. Lux Living had become a reflection of that belief. As the months went by, the store's influence continued to grow, and Jeff was proud of the role he had played in making that happen. He had been a part of something bigger than himself, and the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. Because in the end, it wasn't just about a store or a job. It was about the kind of person you became, the kind of world you helped create. And Jeff knew without a doubt that the world around him was better for the changes they had made together. Lux Living wasn't just about selling luxury goods anymore. It was about creating a legacy of respect, equality, and opportunity. A legacy that would outlast any sale, any product, or any trend. And Jeff was proud to be part of that legacy, knowing that they had built something that would stand the test of time. The store continued to grow, both in terms of its influence and its impact on the community. Lux Living had become more than just a place to shop. It had become a destination for people who valued something beyond luxury products. It was a symbol of change, of what could happen when people decided to make a difference, one step at a time. Jeff had watched this transformation unfold, and he had been a part of it every step of the way. But as the business expanded, new challenges began to arise. As much as they had improved, there were still lingering elements of resistance within the staff. Some employees still hadn't fully embraced the changes that had been made. The notion of treating everyone equally, of seeing the value in each person, no matter their background, was still foreign to some. And Jeff knew that, despite the strides they had made, there was still work to be done. He'd seen it in the way some employees interacted with customers, in the occasional dismissive glance or comment that seemed out of place in the new, more inclusive environment. Change wasn't a switch you could flip. It was an ongoing process, and Jeff had come to understand that. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. One evening, as Jeff was closing up the store, he overheard a conversation between two employees. They were talking about a new policy that had been introduced, one that made sure every customer, no matter their appearance, was treated with the same level of respect. "I don't get it," one of the employees said. "Why do we have to treat everyone the same? Not everyone deserves it." The words hit Jeff like a punch in the gut. It was exactly what he had feared. There were still those who didn't understand the vision, who couldn't see the value in treating people equally. He paused for a moment, listening to the conversation, feeling the old sense of frustration rise within him. But then he remembered what had changed for him. He remembered the way he had once seen the world and how different it looked now. He didn't let the conversation slide. He walked into the break room, his heart pounding. "Hey, guys," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I overheard what you were saying, and I get it. It's hard to change the way we think, but let me tell you something. I've seen firsthand what happens when you treat people like they matter, no matter who they are. I've seen it in the way we've built relationships with our customers. I've seen it in the way we've built a community. And let me tell you something. It makes us better at what we do. We're not here to make a sale. We're here to make a difference." The room went quiet. The employees looked at each other, then back at Jeff. The tension in the room seemed to shift, as if they were beginning to understand what Jeff was saying. Change wasn't just about following rules, it was about a mindset, a belief in treating people with kindness and respect. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," Jeff continued, his voice steady. "I'm just asking you to try. To see people for who they are, not what they have or how they look. That's the kind of place we're building here, and I know it's not easy, but I believe in all of you." For the first time, there was no argument, no resistance, just a quiet acknowledgement that Jeff had made his point. He wasn't asking them to change overnight, but he was showing them that they could be a part of something bigger, something that mattered. The days that followed were a turning point. Jeff could feel the shift in the store. There was a renewed sense of unity among the staff, a commitment to the values that had been instilled in them. Lux Living was becoming more than just a place to work. It was becoming a place where people could grow, where they could learn, and where they could make a difference in the world. But even as things improved, Jeff knew that the real work wasn't just about what happened inside the store. The community outreach programs, the charity events, the partnerships, they were all important. But the most important change needed to happen in the hearts of the people who worked there. Lux Living could only become the company they wanted it to be if everyone involved truly embraced the idea of respect and equality. And that meant Jeff had to lead by example. He had always thought that leadership was about authority, about making decisions that others followed. But now, Jeff knew that true leadership was about being present, about guiding others, and about setting an example of what it meant to treat others with respect. Leadership wasn't about control, it was about empowering others to do the right thing. As Lux Living continued to expand its reach, Jeff found himself stepping into a larger role. He wasn't just a part of the team anymore, he was a part of the change. The man in the hoodie had shown him that leadership was about more than just managing. It was about influencing others in a way that made them want to be better. And now Jeff had to take that lesson and make it his own. One day, as he was walking through the store, he caught sight of a young employee who had just started working there. She was helping a customer, but Jeff noticed that her demeanor was off. She seemed nervous, unsure of herself. Jeff approached her quietly and watched as she assisted the customer. It wasn't that she was doing anything wrong, but it was clear she didn't feel confident in her role. After the customer left, Jeff pulled her aside. "Hey, you're doing great," he said, offering her a warm smile. "But I want you to know something. You're here because we believe in you. You don't have to be perfect. Just be yourself. Be kind. Be respectful. That's what matters here." The young woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jeff smiled, knowing that it wasn't just about giving her reassurance. It was about showing her that she was already enough, that the values they were instilling in the store weren't just rules to follow, but a way of being. The changes at Lux Living had become something more than Jeff had ever imagined. The store had become a beacon for what was possible when people worked together, when they embraced respect, and when they created a space where everyone was valued. But as much as the store had transformed, Jeff knew the real change was happening within the people who worked there, the employees who had been a part of this journey, who had learned the value of treating everyone equally. And then one day the man in the hoodie came back. This time, it wasn't just a quick visit. He walked through the doors with his father, the billionaire. They weren't here to make a sale or discuss business. They were here to see the fruits of their labor. Lux Living had become a place they were proud of. They had built something that mattered, something that would leave a lasting legacy. Jeff watched as the man in the hoodie surveyed the store, a look of pride on his face. He walked over to Jeff, offering him a nod of approval. "You've done well," he said. "This place is everything I hoped it would be. I'm proud of what we've built." Jeff felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. It had been a long journey, one filled with doubts, fears, and challenges. But now, standing here, he knew that the work they had put in had been worth it. Lux Living was no longer just a store. It was a symbol of what could happen when people decided to make a difference, when they embraced kindness, respect, and equality. The man smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come. "This," he said, "is only the beginning. There's still so much more to do, but I know we're on the right path." As time went on, Lux Living continued to thrive, not just as a business, but as a movement. More and more people were drawn to the store, not just for the luxury products, but for the culture it represented. They knew that Lux Living wasn't just about what you bought, it was about who you were when you walked through the door. Jeff had become a leader in this transformation. He had learned the true meaning of respect, and he had shared that lesson with everyone around him. Lux Living had become a place where people could not only shop, but where they could feel like they belonged. And Jeff had helped make that happen. As he looked around the store, watching customers interact with the staff, Jeff knew that this was only the beginning. There would always be more work to do. But for the first time in his life, he felt certain of one thing: change was possible, and he had been a part of making it happen. The story of Lux Living wasn't just about luxury products or high-end sales. It was about the people who walked through the door and the way they treated each other. And Jeff knew that this store, this movement, would leave a lasting legacy of respect, equality, and kindness for generations to come. The following months brought more growth, both for Lux Living and for Jeff personally. The changes they had made together, the commitment to respect, fairness, and equality, had built something far greater than a store. They had built a culture that spread beyond the walls of the business. Lux Living had become a model for other companies, a place where respect was not a luxury, but a foundation. Jeff, now in a leadership role, felt the weight of responsibility, but it wasn't a burden, it was a privilege. Every day he saw how the store continued to affect people's lives. Customers were treated with dignity, no matter who they were. Employees were empowered, encouraged to be themselves, and bring their best to the workplace. The ripple effect of their work was tangible, and Jeff knew that they were only scratching the surface. Lux Living had become a beacon for change, but Jeff knew it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. The lessons they had learned together would continue to guide them, shaping the future of the store and the people it touched. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The story of Lux Living was a testament to the power of transformation. What had started as a place focused solely on luxury products had grown into something much bigger. It had become a space where people could walk in and feel valued, respected, and welcome. The story of Jeff, the staff, and the owner wasn't just about business. It was about making a difference in the world. And Jeff, who had once been lost in the pursuit of wealth and status, had learned the most important lesson of all: true success comes from how you treat others. Lux Living wasn't just about selling products. It was about creating a community, a legacy of respect, and a culture where everyone felt they belonged. As Jeff looked around the store, he smiled. The work wasn't done, and there would always be challenges ahead. But for now, he knew that he had been a part of something bigger than himself, a movement that would continue to inspire, change, and make a difference in the world for years to come.